I said we're going to have a very brief introduction to the precepts and to this third precept. The precept is, I undertake the training rule to abstain from sexual misconduct, and that sounds pretty severe. So it's also the title or whatever, not a title really, but what we're also looking at tonight is hopefully is what the nature of abstain or restraint might look like. But also, we're talking about some also very wholesome sexual energy. So there's in all the precepts, there is the sort of what we're saying no to by way of what we're saying yes to. So there's always that other side of it. And all of the precepts, and so I'm going to go into that a little bit, are very deeply grounded, as everything is in all the teachings. They always are pointing to each other, and the Dharma is rich in that way. You start talking about one thing and you're going into other dimensions as well. But the precepts are very deeply grounded in the Dharma. The Buddha, as we know, was a pragmatist. He recognized, as we all do, that there's pain in the world. There's old age, there's sickness, there's death. I mean, no one gets out of this alive, right? I don't mean this room, but I mean, I actually had someone say that to me in a teaching one time. Like, really? But the suffering, sometimes there's a distinction that we make between pain, which is here and unavoidable, it is just part of being a human being, and suffering. And suffering is how we relate to pain, how we relate as well to what is the phenomenal nature of everything, that everything changes, that everything is impermanent. That can be the good news when it's something that we don't want, but it also can be felt as the bad news when it's something we want and that's something that we really want to hold on to. And so the effect of that is that inherent in everything is also a certain dissatisfaction or unsatisfaction, a pervasive sense of unease sometimes, because you can even sometimes feel that change when we sit quietly in meditation. That the world, and also there's nothing in the world, I should say, that offers us any lasting satisfaction. So it's suffering is, about all of that. How do we relate to that when we would prefer to have things be the way we would like them to be than the way they are? So that's the first noble truth. And that's a very powerful, not only that we know that the suffering, but also that it's not just things that happen, it's how we relate. The second noble truth is, and you often see the word as translated as desire, which can be problematic, and also true as well, but that that craving and attachment, and attachment really hits it as well as craving, is that sticky sense of just, in Tibetan, the Tibetan teachings, they refer to it as shempa. It sticks, it's like you can't unhook. It's very sticky stuff. So that craving or attachment and clinging, which is often the case of desire as we typically understand it, for something to be other than it is the root of suffering. That is the root of suffering. It is not things in of themselves being pleasant or unpleasant. It is the pushing away, and so, or clinging. So the suffering itself then manifests in those what are often referred to as those three poisons: greed, hate, greed, wanting more and more, not just the one cookie, but the second cookie, and now I've got the whole bag down, and I haven't even tasted the first one, right? That pushes us forward sometimes. We're not even aware of it until we're, going ugh. Greed for all kinds of things as well. Greed for status, greed for money, greed for power. Certainly, we have a lot of seeing some of that in today, as well as the second poison, which is the hatred and ill will, which is something that is likewise very powerful, especially when the ill will or experience of aversion is towards something that is unhealthy. That's a particularly difficult one. You know, we have a lot to be upset about, some of us, and you know, when we do, we can get quite caught up in systems and forms of our own hatred and ill will. But ill will and hatred, that aversion, that not wanting, not okay, go away. And delusion, which is confusion and not understanding. So it brings us also to the essence of what, you know, is also here in the teachings, is that it's ignorance. Ignorance is a very deep part of what contributes to suffering, and even on the deeper levels, not just not wanting that other thing that we can't have, but not understanding the phenomenal nature of things. That in essence, as they say, or I don't know who said it first, maybe Joseph Goldstein, that there are no nouns. You know, they're just verbs. As one teacher, I think that might have been Lee, I don't know, said, we're all just, or everything is just slow-moving nouns, you know, or rather fast, you know, slow-moving verbs, I mean, slow-moving verbs. There are no nouns. Everything is changing, even this solid-looking brass. So, and the self is also, the self that we can sometimes too tightly identify with, is also a verb, not a noun, with nothing fixed or solid, but shaped, as is everything, truly, moment to moment out of the arising or dependent co-arising of various causes and conditions. That also brings us to that place, which is a very powerful and important recognition, that we are interdependent, that we cannot exist, that we do not exist in isolation. Even if we choose isolation, we coexist. And that interdependence and the recognition that we are not separate in interdependence is a very powerful insight and understanding that underlies the precepts. And in particular, I would say, or at least for this evening's discussion, this third precepts. The 5 precepts, which Thich Nhat Hanh refers to as the 5 mindfulness trainings, are actually principles of restraint. So I prefer the word restraint. Principles of restraint and of virtue, principles of virtue. And so those are kind of 2 things that are operating here, which arise out of that fundamental insight that we're interdependent. And also the wisdom of the four noble truths, that the root of suffering is craving, especially when we look at desire. And the liberation from suffering is to walk that eightfold path, to cultivate the skillful means grounded in ethics, wisdom, and compassion. 3 of the precepts are actually enfolded into the 4th part, the 4th path, right effort. And that is the first precept on killing, not killing, abstaining from killing. The second, I don't know if it's what precept, the second, maybe the second, no. Not taking what is not yours, or taking not what is not yours, stealing. And this third precept. So they are contained in what is called on the Eightfold Path is right action. Right being also a misnomer, it means wise and full action, complete action, the fullness of this with skillful means. So when we train in the precepts, we are actually exercising restraint to investigate the cause of our immediate suffering in that moment, what is creating suffering, and what's feeding it. So it's really a contemplative process. And at a deeper level, we can take it to a deeper level, we can also investigate as well the nature of existence itself, that if I don't cling to it, it's going to change anyway, and it might even, depending on the intensity, what we call self-liberate. It may just dissolve. So that's the good thing, that's the good news again, if it's something that is painful or uncomfortable in some way. But it's not necessarily the good news when it's something that we really are having pleasure with, and we want it to last. That impermanence that leads to that dissatisfaction. And that craving, we can see that as well, is the source of, suffering. And that all the energies, and this is very important to remember, that all the energies and feelings that arise within us at that primary level of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, at that point of contact with things, and it just arises because we are a human being. And it's also, very impersonal in that regard, because it's not just you in whom it arises. It arises in someone in Burma, someone in Indonesia, someone, in Tanzania. I mean, it is a human event. And not just a human event. I believe these things arise in animals and beings that we don't even fully understand. So the feelings that arise, and feelings that can be quite disturbing, if someone is having a desire for something that they know is also inappropriate or hurtful, or like, wow, I can't believe I'm sitting on a retreat here now, my third day in, getting very relaxed, and all of a sudden what's happening is all this sexual imagery is rising, and that's not supposed to be happening, right? And the glance across the room to someone that may begin what they classically, or in a humorous way, call the Vipassana romance, I mean, when you have nothing else to do but, eat food and follow your breath, things are going to arise. And sometimes it are actually lustful thoughts. Joseph Goldstein, tells a story, and I won't go into it into a greater depth, about himself sitting and going into deep states and having, lustful thoughts arise. And it was like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? This shouldn't be happening. And being told, I believe by Ajahn Chah, just to be with it. This just is, be with it. And as he sat with it for, I would guess, more than one day, he discovered that, what was in there initially seemed to be, deep insecurities, really deep insecurities of not feeling enoughness and even loneliness as he began to plummet, and anxiety and so forth. And so it came to a space where through the process itself, and this is what's very important here, on the path. Just by opening to the process itself, we can drop deeper and deeper, and things reveal themselves in wonderful and mysterious ways. And we can come to places that we can then also deeply connect to some other truths. The truth of I'm okay, the truth that desire was fine, but I don't have to act on it. I don't have to cling to it. It's not neither good nor bad, it just is. And the truth that we can also let go. We can let go, which is at the heart of awakening itself. So the precepts are not, we really don't want to get hooked on that word when it says, I undertake the training rule, can sound a little scary. The precepts are not just a set of commandments and rules, and regulations. They are really a path of inquiry. They're a path that can lead in that respect to a deepened wisdom and certainly compassion for ourselves and others, whatever is arising. And that inquiry is also, again, the principle of virtue, principles of restraint, which allows us to pause and to have the inquiry, as well as then what are the foundations of that are the values and virtues of non-harming. This is at the heart as well of the Dharma. I can never pronounce it correctly. Ahimsa, which is non-harming. Do no harm. Do no harm in the values of compassion and of generosity. That can also lead to joy and peace and the harmony that this is all about, of living in relationship in a wholesome and healthy way with others, and in a wakeful, wholesome and healthy way. So the precepts, and in particular I'm going to encourage you to think about this, that they are also about cultivating relationships that are based on what we would call stewardship. You can hear that language sometimes. I think it comes out of the Bible, actually, and it's often, we hear it now in terms of the earth, And it's an important concept to understand in that way as well. And here, stewardship is an ethic of caring. It's an ethic of caring and connection with each other and with the earth, where we don't own the earth, we don't own our bodies, and we don't own anybody else's body either. Versus the contrast to stewardship, which is dominion. So stewardship and dominion. And dominion is what it sounds like: power, control, getting our needs met at another's expense, or the assumption in a relationship that you are an object there to also meet my needs. Sometimes we get caught in that. I do a lot of work, as you may know, I'm a therapist, and I do a lot of work with couples, and we hit these things all the time, and certainly even in my own life, I need you, blah, blah, and we say these things. But the truth is, we need to explore what are those needs, what is that desire, and how are we relating to them ourselves? What is calling up in us to have that need or that desire? So when we train in the third precept, abstaining from sexual misconduct, we are training not only in restraint, as I said already, that what we are saying no to, we are also training in what we are saying yes to, and that's very important. This is where we can get into the power and the extraordinary creative energy of sexual energies. It's the energy that pushes the flower through the earth. The bulb coming up, which they are actually coming up around my house now, in February. Things that just push through in their kind of becoming alive, coming into liveness. So when we train, we're not only training what we say no to, we're training what we're saying yes to, which is to be alive fully without clinging. There's no intention, I think, in my understanding of the path, that it's about misery. And when we think of even the word renunciation, which has that quality of just, cut off in something very severe, it is about letting go to open up. So that is always it. You are letting go to open up. So sexual energy is a very powerful and creative force, which, like desire itself, can be for good or harm. And for good when desire is not driven by insecurities or driven by addictions, it becomes addictive or harmful. Or we are either, and this is Jack Cornfield's language, we are neither numbed out because we can't own it at all. I don't mean own it that it's ours, but I mean accept it and be with it. So we neither numbed out or lost in it. Those are the two extremes. So how, as in all things in the path, do we come to that middle path? How do we walk that, which is, a dance, a balance. And to dance and balance that path requires a certain sort of willingness to open up to the mindful, contemplative piece of what we are doing. Where is this coming from? So in committed relationships, and this is in some sense the third precept as it was initially, or as it is described in Right Action. Well, no, not there, but I'm not sure if it's there, actually, forgive me, but it's somewhere. It is actually described, in terms of marriage, infidelity. But even there, fidelity of husband to wife, but even there, given the culture, it would be fidelity to if the husband in that time had a consort. The consort would be not having relations with anybody else either, nor the object of another man's object of desire either. That would be, in some sense, or object of taking her in some sexual way, that would be a violation. So we have to look at also these precepts in terms of, cultures and what is acceptable and life-enhancing in those cultures, and without the judgment in that regard. One, even in that precept, doesn't even have to be married or be a consort. It can be someone still who is in a relationship with another that is still committed. So it's not so narrow and fixed, even as it was described. So in committed relationships, how we open to desire and sexual energy can not only deepen our union as sexual partners, but as partners on the Eightfold Path. When we can let go of objectifying one another and see more clearly into our open and receptive and loving, Buddha nature, we can create, hopefully, a holding embrace, a holding environment, in psychological terms, where, and this comes a little bit out of Mark Epstein, a book I highly recommend if anybody's interested in the left-hand path, which is a real opening to desire and having desire and sexuality actually a very deepened part of the path. That leads to Tantra and that kind of a thing. But it is to embrace the reality of what is, that we can have love and hate, and I say that, delicately in a relationship. There can be a moment when you're so angry at your beloved that you really want to give them a Zen whack, right? I call it a Zen whack, but it's like, that snarky thing that may be rising. Or, you just, are just, so delighted, you just flooded with joy and love. So there's relationships have the full round of our capacity to feel. And when they don't, that's when often we also get in trouble.